talk about grit. And I think if there's a season where preachers need to be anchored in grit, this is definitely one of those moments. It seems like there's no shortage of, at least in the conversations that I'm having with preachers, people reflecting that sentiment of being troubled in their own heart. How do you navigate carrying the weight or the angst of this unique cultural moment and our own kind of human tensions and trials and foibles, and this high calling, this responsibility to present God's word to God's people week in and week out?
Yeah. Well, part of it is recognizing that our role is important, but rather small. That it's actually God who is rescuing the world and has rescued the world. It's God who loves the world and our church and our neighborhood far more than we do. It's the God who is before us. And it probably requires spending a little time or just reminding ourselves of the simplest truths that we already know, which is like, what is preaching even to begin with? Preaching is not, a lecture with theological language sprinkled in. It's not an attempt to merely play a religious role because we've got 37 minutes or 14 minutes to fill on a Sunday morning, but that preaching is this mysterious and uncontainable encounter where I, as the preacher, am being met by the living God, and then I am offering that meeting to my fellow journeyers as we are all together meeting the living God. And if that's what's happening, if that's the context, then it doesn't lighten the load necessarily. It doesn't take away the burden. It certainly doesn't remove us from the pain, but it changes the trajectory and it changes the story in which we're living. And most of us use language like we're living in God's story, etc., which is beautiful language. But it seems to me these days that many of us are living more in our story than we are in God's story. And there's no more suffocating and terrifying place to be than when you're the biggest character in the room. So I don't know how to stand up. 2017, I was a pastor in Charlottesville, Virginia, and when the Unite the Right rally happened and that evil was visited into our town, and what do you do on that Sunday morning when you stand up? And I remember thinking, and I think I ended up saying as much to our church in the call to worship. At this moment, what we're doing as we're gathering together to pronounce God's presence and to worship God, to proclaim God's truth, to have tears together, to come around the Lord's table together. Us being here only hours after what we saw and experienced downtown, this is either the most foolish thing in the world, or this is our hope. There was like no middle ground. And so in that moment, it was this reckoning both with this deep sorrow about the pain and the evil that was inflicted on so many and part of our history, but at the same time, pronouncing God's presence in the midst of that was the most centering and hopeful reality. And I think that's played out in all of our contexts over and again in a myriad of ways.